Hello, this is Steve Bonacontri from SOA Consulting Services doing a tutorial on Angular 4, and today we're going to talk about CLI. Okay, CLI is a command line interface tool used to initialize, develop, and scaffold and maintain Angular applications. The way you install it, you do npm install -g angular /CLI. Now, WebStorm development tool comes with CLI. You actually create projects with it. So a lot of stuff that we're going to discuss here, some of the tools have some of the stuff built in, but you will probably use these commands anyway. So let's review some of them. Okay, so to use it, you do an ng, which is the Angular CLI tool, space new my project. And if you cd into my project and you do an ng serve, you could start up the server, which will serve your application and will automatically reload the application if you change any of the source files. Once you create a project with Angular CLI, you basically cd in the project. You can look at the version of ng and it would show you the version of CLI you're using, the version of Node.js, the version of Angular. And as you see, we're using Angular 4, Node 6, Angular CLI 1.0. Now, npm CLI will have different versions. Node will have its own version, and Angular will have its own version, and that allows the maintenance of the different tools and packages to be separate and be maintained separately and be updated separately. Okay, so like I said, creating a new Angular project, you ng new my project. You could also do ng completion to add autocomplete functionality. You could run all the end-to-end tests in your application using protractor, do an ng space e2e. And you could also build and serve your app doing ng space serve. And of course, you can get help on Angular by doing the ng space help. When you do this, you get a list of commands. You could see how to deploy your app to a URL. You could see how to generate components. And you'll be quite impressed with the list of options you have with ng. Okay, so to generate new code inside your project, you do an ng generate. So you could generate a component, let's say a customer component. You could generate a directive. Let's suppose I call it customer details, where the directive just formats the details of the customer, let's say the phone number or something like that. You could generate a pipe. Let's say it's customer currency, so it looks at the customer's language, location, and would basically filter that through a currency pipe and display something with that customer currency. And you could also generate a service. Suppose we want to do ng space generate space service and just define the customer service that we want to produce, and it would update your project with the producing the file, updating the module to import the file, etc. Okay, so the generate component has its own directory by default, but we'll see that when we do this, some of them will not create their own directory. You could use the -- flat option just to create the components. It seems like this might be a default for some of the components, but we'll see, and I'll show you that when you use some of these generate functions, things get generated in the components directory, or they might just get generated in the present directory. Okay, with Angular CLI, you could also do a get, and basically that'll go into the Angular CLI configuration, which will display a name value. So if you do an ng get e2e and end-to-end, it'll show you that it's using protractor for the end-to-end test, and it'll point to the configuration file. If you do get get project.name, you'll see that it's returning a project JSON object which has a name and a seed. And you could also set those values as well. Okay, you could build an application for production, set up the GitHub repository, then publish the application. And you could do things like run a codelizer linter on your project. So if I do an ng-lint in my project directory, I'll see that I'm missing a white space in my app.component file. And what I find is it'll complain about a lot of things that are possible errors, but your projects will run. It's good to run lint and fix all the issues. Okay, so and you could output the version like we saw in the previous slide. When you do an ngtest, basically Angular CLI has created several test configuration or test files in your project, and when you run ngtest, it will run tests using Karma, and basically what you'll see is that your app component should have a title. Let's say app works by default, and it should render the title in the h1 tag, and it'll go through these tests and show you that they are passing. It'll show you how many specs, and it'll show you that the application is passing. But just keep in mind, as soon as you go in that component, you modify the title or remove that attribute, the test fails. So what I find myself doing is creating projects and moving forward, coding, building my application, and then going back and updating my tests. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the commands and get you more familiar with them.